The evening sky had turned a deep purple as the nation's first black FBI director drove along the quiet suburban streets outside Washington, D.C. He loosened his tie slightly, the weight of the day's classified national security briefing still heavy on his mind. The headlights of his unmarked government sedan cut through the growing darkness as he navigated the winding roads of the upscale neighborhood. The FBI director had chosen the scenic route home, needing some time to process everything before returning to his family. The neighborhood streets were lined with large homes set back from the road, their windows glowing warmly against the evening sky. The radio played softly in the background, classical music, a Bach concerto that usually helped calm his thoughts after particularly stressful days. He checked his watch. Just past 9:30 p.m., his phone buzzed with a message from his wife asking when he'd be home. He made a mental note to respond when he reached the next stop sign, not wanting to text while driving, especially after the long day had left him feeling drained. The flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror broke through his thoughts. The FBI director frowned slightly, checking his speedometer. He had been driving just under the speed limit, and his government vehicle was in perfect working order. Nevertheless, he signaled and pulled over to the right, following standard procedure exactly as he had taught countless agents under his command over the years. The FBI director took a deep breath and placed his hands at the 10 and 2 positions, on the steering wheel where they would be clearly visible. Despite holding the highest law enforcement position in the country, he knew the delicate dance of traffic stops all too well. He had given lectures about proper conduct during police interactions, and he practiced what he preached. The police cruiser stopped behind him, its lights still flashing brightly, illuminating the inside of his car in alternating colors. In his rearview mirror, he could see an officer emerge, a tall, broad-shouldered man who approached with his hand already resting on his holstered weapon. Something about the officer's posture made the FBI director uneasy. "License and registration," the officer demanded, his flashlight beam shining directly into the FBI director's eyes, temporarily blinding him. "Good evening, officer," the FBI director replied calmly. "My name is—" "I didn't ask for your name," the officer cut him off sharply. "License and registration, now." The FBI director nodded. "I'm going to reach for my credentials," he said, clearly. "I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." He moved his right hand slowly toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket, where he kept his FBI identification. The movement triggered an immediate and startling response. The officer suddenly drew his weapon, pointing it directly at the FBI director's head. "Hands back on the wheel," the officer shouted, his voice sharp with sudden tension. "Now!" The FBI director froze, then carefully returned his hands to the steering wheel. His heart thumped harder in his chest, but years of field experience and crisis training kept his voice steady. "Officer, I'm simply trying to show you my federal credentials. I'm the director of the FBI." The officer's expression hardened. "Step out of the vehicle." Slowly. A second patrol car pulled up, its lights adding to the surreal light show reflecting off the trees and houses nearby. An elderly couple walking their dog on the sidewalk stopped to watch from a distance, their faces concerned in the flashing lights. The FBI director knew escalation when he saw it. He understood that the safest course of action was compliance, even though every protocol was being broken. He carefully opened the door with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible on the wheel until the last possible moment. As he stepped out, the cool night air hit his face. The second officer approached, hand also on his weapon. "Up against the car, spread 'em," the first officer commanded, his gun still drawn. "Officers, I'm going to comply, but I need you to know who I am," the FBI director said, his voice projecting the calm authority that had become his trademark through decades of law enforcement service. "In my inner jacket pocket is my FBI identification. I am the sitting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England," the second officer replied with a snort. "Hands on the vehicle, feet back now." The FBI director placed his hands on the roof of his car, spreading his feet as instructed. He could feel the eyes of the gathering onlookers. More neighbors had emerged from their homes watching the scene unfold from their driveways and porches. The first officer roughly patted him down, finding his wallet and removing it. When he flipped it open, the FBI director could see the moment of recognition and alarm cross the officer's face as he stared at the official FBI credentials. "Check this out," the first officer said to his partner, handing over the wallet, his voice suddenly uncertain. The second officer examined the credentials, then looked up at the FBI director's face, comparing it to the photo ID. His eyes widened slightly. "Where's your service weapon?" the second officer asked, his tone now markedly different. "Locked in the glove box, as per regulations when I'm off duty," the FBI director replied evenly. "The key is on my keychain." A third police car arrived on the scene, and an older officer stepped out. The moment he saw the FBI director standing against the car, his face drained of color. He hurried over. "What's going on here?" the senior officer asked, looking between his colleagues and the FBI director. "These officers pulled me over and have yet to tell me why," the FBI director explained, his hands still placed on the roof of his car. "I identified myself as FBI director but wasn't permitted to show my credentials before having a weapon drawn on me." The senior officer's expression shifted to one of horror as he recognized the FBI director immediately. "Sir, I'm so sorry." "Officers, stand down immediately," he ordered. "Do you have any idea who this is?" The two younger officers exchanged glances, a creeping realization washing over their faces. "Get your hands off the vehicle, sir. Please," the senior officer said, his voice almost pleading. "I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding." The FBI director lowered his hands and turned to face the three officers, straightening his tie and jacket with dignity. Despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, he maintained the composed demeanor that had served him through countless crises. "I'd like to know the reason I was stopped," he said, his tone professional but firm. The first officer swallowed hard. "Your vehicle matches a description. We had a report of—" "His taillight is out," the second officer interjected quickly. The FBI director glanced at his car, then back at the officers. "All my lights are functioning properly. I checked them yesterday." The growing crowd of neighbors was watching intently now, some with phones raised, recording the scene. The senior officer noticed and stepped closer, speaking in a hushed tone. "Sir, on behalf of the department, I want to express our deepest apologies. This should never have happened." The FBI director looked at the officers' nameplates, committing them to memory. He noticed the first officer's body camera was off, though department policy required it to be active during all traffic stops. The dashboard camera on the patrol car, however, was still recording, its small red light blinking steadily in the darkness. "We'll sort this out," the FBI director said quietly. "But right now, I'd like to be on my way home." The senior officer nodded vigorously. "Of course, sir, you're free to go." As the FBI director returned to his vehicle, he could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him. The neighbors, the officers, possibly even those recording from a distance. He started the engine and pulled away slowly, his mind already racing, with the implications of what had just occurred. As the nation's top law enforcement official, he had just experienced firsthand the very problem he had been working to address within the system. His phone buzzed again. His wife, wondering why he was late. How would he even begin to explain what had just happened? And what would happen tomorrow when the news inevitably broke? The morning sun had barely risen when the FBI director's phone began ringing nonstop. He sat at the edge of his bed, still wearing his pajamas, watching news footage of himself kneeling on the pavement from the night before. Someone had recorded the entire incident on their phone from across the street. The video wasn't clear, but it was good enough to recognize him, the nation's top law enforcement officer, being treated like a criminal. "This is completely unacceptable," his wife said, pacing the bedroom with her coffee mug clutched tightly in her hand. "You need to do something." The FBI director rubbed his eyes. He'd slept poorly, the memory of cold gunmetal pointed at his face replaying whenever he closed his eyes. "I'm going to handle it," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure how. His secure line rang. It was the Attorney General, I just saw the footage, the Attorney General said without preamble. The president wants a briefing in an hour. This is already exploding on social media. The FBI director showered and dressed quickly, choosing his most formal suit, dark navy with a crisp white shirt and red tie. The uniform of authority. As his driver took him to the White House, he scrolled through news alerts on his secure tablet. The headlines were everywhere. FBI director held at gunpoint by local police. Top cop gets taste of own medicine. Racial profiling? FBI director detained without cause. His social media team had already sent 3 different statements for his approval. He rejected them all. This wasn't just a PR issue to be managed. This was personal. At the White House, security personnel nodded with extra deference as he passed through checkpoints. Word had spread quickly. In the West Wing, staffers averted their eyes or offered sympathetic smiles as he walked to the Oval Office. The president was waiting with the Attorney General and the White House Chief of Staff. "Tell me exactly what happened," the president said after they exchanged brief greetings. The FBI director recounted the previous night's events in precise detail, just as he would have given any other briefing. The facts without embellishment, the truth without emotion. But when he described the moment the officer drew his weapon, his voice caught slightly. "And you identified yourself immediately?" the chief of staff asked. "Multiple times," the FBI director confirmed. "I followed every procedure correctly." "The officer claims you made a suspicious movement," the Attorney General added, reading from his phone. "The police department just released a statement." The FBI director shook his head. "My hands never left the wheel until I was ordered out of the car. The dashboard camera will confirm that." "If the footage exists," the chief of staff said grimly. The officer's body camera was conveniently turned off. The president stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "This puts us in a difficult position. You're the face of federal law enforcement. This incident touches everything we've been trying to address with police reform." "I understand, sir," the FBI director replied. "But with respect, this isn't about politics. This is about right and wrong." "Everything is about politics," the chief of staff countered. "Especially this." When the meeting ended, the FBI director was instructed to let the process work while an investigation was conducted. No public statements without White House approval. No interviews. Business as usual. But business was anything but usual when he arrived at FBI headquarters. The building was surrounded by news vans and reporters shouting questions as his car pulled into the underground garage. Inside, the staff watched him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. His assistant handed him a stack of message slips. "Everyone's calling. Civil rights groups, police unions, congressional committees. Your brother called 3 times. The FBI director nodded and walked into his office, closing the door behind him. On his desk sat a folder containing the initial incident report from the local police department. He opened it and began reading. The report described him as combative and non-compliant. It claimed he had reached suddenly toward his waistband, necessitating the drawn weapon. None of it was true. His phone buzzed with a message from a former colleague now working in the local prosecutor's office. "Dashboard cam footage has gone missing. Technical error, they're saying." He wasn't surprised. Disappointed, but not surprised. He'd spent decades in law enforcement. He knew how the system worked, how it protected its own. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. The deputy director entered with a grave expression. "The officer who pulled you over. We ran a background check," the deputy director said, placing a file on the desk. "He's got 3 civilian complaints for excessive force, all filed by minority drivers. All dismissed." The FBI director opened the file. The officer's social media history showed a pattern of concerning posts. Nothing explicitly racist, but plenty of dog whistles and thin blue-line rhetoric taken to extremes. "There's more," the deputy director continued. "Someone leaked your home address to a police forum online. They're saying you're anti-cop, that you're going to use this to push a political agenda." The FBI director closed the file. I'm not pushing any agenda. I just want the truth. The truth might not matter, the deputy director replied. The narrative is already forming. Half the country thinks you're a victim of racial profiling. The other half thinks you're exaggerating to score political points. By lunchtime, the FBI director had received calls from 6 senators and 3 congressional representatives. Some offered support. Others demanded his resignation for undermining police morale. A right-wing news channel was already featuring interviews with sources close to the investigation, claiming the FBI director had been rude and uncooperative during the stop. His wife called. "They're outside our house," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Reporters, protesters, counter-protesters, the kids are scared." He arranged for additional security at his home and tried to focus on his actual job, running the nation's premier law enforcement agency. But every meeting that day eventually circled back to the incident. His authority felt diminished somehow, as if the image of him kneeling on the pavement had stripped away some essential quality needed for leadership. That evening, a junior agent stopped him in the hallway. "Sir, I just wanted to say..." The young agent hesitated, then stood straighter. "What happened to you happened to my father last year, and my brother the year before that. Nothing changed. Nothing happened to those officers. I joined the bureau hoping to change things from the inside, but sometimes I wonder if that's possible." The FBI director saw the pain and doubt in the young agent's eyes. He recognized it, had seen it in his own reflection that morning. "We have to believe change is possible," he told the agent. "Otherwise, what are we doing here?" Later, alone in his office with the lights of Washington twinkling outside his window, the FBI director made a decision. He would not be silent. He would not let this incident be twisted or buried or explained away. Not because he was special, but precisely because he wasn't. Because what had happened to him happened to Americans across the country every day, with far fewer resources. To seek justice, he began typing a formal complaint against the officers involved. Not as the FBI director, but as a citizen. Every word carefully chosen, every detail precisely recalled. The document he was creating wouldn't just be a complaint. It would be testimony. His secure phone rang again. The White House, again. "The president is concerned about the direction this is taking," the chief of staff said. "There are sensitive relationships between federal and local law enforcement, political considerations." "I understand the politics," the FBI director replied, calmly. "But this isn't a political issue for me. It's personal." "That's exactly the problem," the chief of staff said. "Your personal experience is affecting your judgment." After the call, the FBI director stood by his office window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, the officers who had pulled him over were going about their lives, probably worried about their jobs but confident in the system's ability to protect them. The same system he had served faithfully for decades. He thought about his children, who had watched the footage of their father being handcuffed on the evening news. He thought about the young FBI agent in the hallway, wondering if change was possible. He thought about all the cases that never made the news because the person involved wasn't the FBI director. His decision crystallized. Whatever happened next, whatever. It cost him professionally. He would see this through. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever found themselves looking down the barrel of a gun during what should have been a routine traffic stop. He went back to his desk and continued typing his complaint, the words flowing now with purpose and conviction. The truth deserved to be told, no matter who was telling it. Even if, especially if, that person was the director of the FBI. 3 days after the incident, the FBI director sat in a wood-paneled conference room at the Department of Justice, surrounded by attorneys. His own lawyer, a former prosecutor he'd known for 20 years, sat beside him, reviewing documents. Across the table, representatives from the police department and their legal team shuffled papers nervously. "Let's be clear about something," the FBI director's lawyer said, tapping a folder. "We have witness statements from 7 bystanders. We have partial video from 3 different angles. We have the dash cam footage that miraculously reappeared this morning. All of it contradicts your officer's version of events. The police chief, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, cleared his throat. We take these allegations very seriously. They're not allegations, the FBI director said quietly. They're facts. A tense silence filled the room. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, matching the rhythm of the FBI director's fingers. On the polished table, our officers made a mistake, the police department's lawyer admitted finally. We're prepared to issue a formal apology and place both officers on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The FBI director's lawyer leaned forward. That's not good enough. For the next 2 hours they negotiated. The police department wanted a quick, quiet resolution. The FBI director wanted accountability, real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. By the time they finished, the officers would face disciplinary hearings, and the department would commit to retraining and policy reviews. As they gathered their papers to leave, the police chief approached the FBI director. Off the record, he said in a low voice, "This isn't just about what happened to you, is it?" The FBI director looked him in the eye. It never was. When he returned to FBI headquarters, his assistant intercepted him in the hallway. "Sir, there's been a development. Someone leaked the officer's disciplinary records to the press." In his office, the FBI director turned on the television. Every news channel was covering the story. One of the officers had been involved in 3 similar incidents in the past 2 years, all involving minority drivers, all buried in the system. The second officer had posted racist content on a private social media account that had now been made public. His secure phone rang. The president. "This situation is spiraling," the president said, skipping pleasantries. "The police union is claiming you're orchestrating a witch hunt. Half of Congress is demanding oversight hearings, either to support you or to criticize you depending on their politics." "I didn't leak those records," the FBI director replied. "It doesn't matter who leaked them. You're at the center of a national firestorm about race and policing. The exact issue we've been trying to navigate carefully for political reasons." The FBI director gazed out his window at the Washington Monument in the distance. "With respect, sir, maybe this conversation isn't something we should approach politically." Silence on the line. Then, "You're putting me in a difficult position." After the call, the FBI director canceled his afternoon meetings and drove himself to a small park, where he used to take his children when they were young. He sat on a bench, watching families play, trying to clear his head. An elderly man sat down beside him. "You're him, aren't you?" the man asked. "From the news." The FBI director tensed, preparing for either hostility or awkward support. "My grandson is a police officer," the old man continued. "Good kid. Believes in doing the right thing. He's been troubled by what happened to you." "I have nothing against good police officers," the FBI director said carefully. "I know that. But this country's got a long history with these issues. Sometimes it takes something happening to someone with power before people pay attention." The old man stood, leaning heavily on his cane. "Just thought you should know some folks appreciate you not just letting this slide, even with all the pressure you must be under." That evening, the FBI director received 2 different calls within an hour. The first was from the head of a major civil rights organization, asking him to speak at their annual conference. The second was from the president of the largest police union in the country, suggesting that his actions were damaging police morale nationwide. He declined both invitations. At home, his teenage son barely spoke during dinner, pushing food around his plate until finally asking, "Dad, are you going to lose your job over this?" The question hung in the air. His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I don't know," the FBI director answered honestly. "But some things are more important than a job." "Even being FBI director?" his son pressed. "Even that." Later that night, as the household slept, the FBI director sat in his home office reviewing files on his laptop. His email inbox was flooded. Messages of support, messages of criticism, interview requests, speaking invitations, threats. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the internal FBI case files he'd pulled. Over the past decade, there had been 47 complaints filed by FBI agents who reported being racially profiled by local police while off duty. Most had been quietly resolved or simply buried. None had resulted in significant changes to policy or procedure. He began drafting a memo to all FBI field offices, directing a comprehensive review of these incidents and establishing new protocols for supporting agents who experienced similar situations. It was a small step, but one entirely within his authority. His phone buzzed with a text from the deputy director. "White House Chief of Staff asking about your testimony for congressional hearing next week. Says they want to review it first." FBI director didn't respond immediately. The political machinery was moving to contain the situation, to craft a narrative that would satisfy all constituencies without actually changing anything. He'd seen it happen countless times. His computer chimed with a news alert. A young man in a city across the country had been shot during a traffic stop. The details were sparse but familiar. Another family shattered. Another community outraged. Another case that would either fade from the headlines or become a momentary cause célèbre, depending on factors having nothing to do with justice. He replied to the deputy director's text. "Tell them I'll be writing my own testimony." Then he opened his personal email and found a message from a former colleague who now taught at the FBI Academy. "My students can't stop talking about your case," she'd written. "Would you consider speaking to them? They need to hear from someone who understands both sides, law enforcement and being on the receiving end of a system that doesn't always work the way it should." For the first time in days, the FBI director felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps something meaningful could come from his experience after all, not through political maneuvering or media narratives, but through honest conversation with the next generation of agents. He typed a reply accepting the invitation. The next morning, his government vehicle pulled up to FBI headquarters just as dawn broke over the city. Security personnel nodded respectfully as he passed. In the elevator, 2 agents stepped aside to let him enter first. The usual deference. But something felt different now. There was an undercurrent of tension, of uncertainty about what would happen next. In his office, a stack of newspapers awaited him, each featuring his story. One headline caught his eye. "FBI Director's Traffic Stop, a Turning Point." He wasn't sure if it was a turning point for the country, but it had certainly been one for him. The man who had entered that traffic stop 3 days ago was not the same man who now sat at the director's desk, facing choices that would define not just his career, but his legacy. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, the Attorney General is here to see you." The FBI director straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Whatever came next, he was ready. The marble hallways of the Capitol echoed with footsteps as the FBI director made his way to the hearing room. Security guards flanked him, though he hardly needed protection in a building full of police. Still, the tension was palpable. This wasn't just any congressional hearing. It was political theater at its finest, with the FBI director cast as both hero and villain, depending on which side of the aisle was speaking. Inside the packed hearing room, cameras flashed as he took his seat at the witness table. He placed his prepared testimony in front of him, 15 carefully crafted pages that the White House had never seen. His disobedience would have consequences, but that seemed less important now than speaking the truth. The committee chairperson, a stern-faced woman with decades in politics, called the hearing to order. "We are here today to discuss the troubling incident involving our FBI director and to examine what it tells us about the state of policing and race relations in America." For the next hour, the FBI director answered questions. Some congresspeople were sympathetic, others openly hostile. One elderly representative leaned forward, peering over his glasses. "You've been in law enforcement your entire career," he said. "You've defended the police at every turn. Now suddenly you're a critic because of one bad experience?" The FBI director leaned toward his microphone. "I'm not a critic of police. I'm a critic of bad policing." "There's a difference." Another representative, younger and more aggressive, shuffled through papers. "Your officers have a different account of what happened that night. They say you were belligerent, that you refused to comply. The video evidence contradicts their account. the FBI director replied calmly. Convenient that this video emerged when it did, the representative shot back. Convenient for justice, perhaps, the FBI director said, holding the man's gaze until he looked away. By midday, social media was flooded with clips from the hearing. The FBI director's calm but firm responses played well with the public. The dashboard camera footage, now officially released, was being analyzed frame by frame on news programs. The officer's claims were crumbling under scrutiny. During a break, the FBI director stepped into a quiet hallway to call his wife. "How's it going?" she asked. "About as expected," he replied. "Half of them want to canonize me, half want to crucify me. None of them are actually listening." "Your son is watching the live stream in his history class," she told him. "His teacher is using it as a lesson on civic engagement." The thought of his son watching gave him renewed purpose as he returned for the afternoon session. The questioning grew more pointed as the day wore on. A particularly shrewd congresswoman from the Midwest caught him off guard. "Director, you've acknowledged reviewing similar complaints from FBI agents over the years, minority agents who experienced racial profiling while off duty. Yet you never made this a priority until it happened to you. Why is that?" The room fell silent. It was a fair question, uncomfortably fair. "You're right," he admitted after a moment. "I should have done more. I saw those complaints as isolated incidents rather than a pattern. That was a failure on my part, one I'm trying to correct now." His honesty seemed to surprise even his critics. By the time the hearing ended, the mood in the room had shifted subtly. This wasn't just about one traffic stop or one FBI director. It was about a system that needed fixing regardless of political affiliation. Outside the Capitol, reporters swarmed him. "Director, will you resign? Are you calling for the officers to be fired? Is this about race or police misconduct?" He ignored them all, sliding into his waiting SUV. His phone was already ringing, the Attorney General. "The President watched your testimony," the Attorney General said without preamble. "He's not happy that you went off script." "I didn't go off script," the FBI director replied. "I simply wrote my own script." "That's not how this works, and you know it. There are protocols, clearance procedures. For matters of national security, yes. This was my personal testimony about my personal experience." The Attorney General sighed. "The police union is calling for your resignation. They say you've lost the confidence of law enforcement nationwide." "Have I? Or have they lost confidence in a system that protects bad behavior?" As his SUV pulled into FBI headquarters, he was surprised to see a small group gathered out front. Not protesters, but FBI employees, agents and support staff standing quietly in a show of solidarity. They nodded respectfully as he passed. His office, the deputy director, was waiting with a grim expression. "The internal affairs investigation on the officers is complete," he said, handing over a tablet. "You'll want to see this." The FBI director scrolled through the report. Both officers had long histories of complaints, mostly from minority drivers. Most had been dismissed or buried through the police union's intervention. Text messages between the officers on the night of the incident revealed they had recognized him almost immediately but proceeded anyway, one writing, "Let's show him how it feels on the other side." "They knew who I was," the FBI director said quietly. "This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate." "There's more," the deputy director said. "Their supervising lieutenant knew about their history of racial profiling, did nothing. The police chief received reports about these officers 3 times in the past year. Did nothing." The FBI director set down the tablet. "It's not just bad apples, it's the whole orchard." That evening, he kept a promise he'd made earlier that week, speaking to cadets at the FBI Academy. Looking out at their young faces, he saw the future of law enforcement. They were diverse, eager, idealistic. They hadn't yet been hardened by the system or taught to look away from injustice within their ranks. "I've spent my career upholding the law," he told them. "I believed in the system because I helped build it. But systems are only as good as the people who run them, and the courage of those willing to point out when they fail." A young cadet raised her hand. "Sir, given everything that's happened, do you regret joining law enforcement?" The FBI director considered the question carefully. No, he said finally, because change doesn't come from outside institutions. It comes from within them, from people brave enough to stand up and say this isn't right, even when it costs them something. Afterwards, driving home through the darkened streets of Washington, he reflected on how much had changed in just 1 week. The traffic stop that had left him shaken and humiliated had also opened his eyes to realities he'd been unwilling to fully acknowledge before. His position of power hadn't protected him in that moment, but it gave him a platform now. One he intended to use wisely. His phone rang. "The White House Chief of Staff. We need to talk about your future," the man said bluntly. The FBI director watched the city lights pass by. "Yes," he agreed. "I believe we do." He ended the call just as his SUV pulled into his driveway. His home was still surrounded by media, but there were others too. Community members holding candles in a quiet vigil of support. Among them, he recognized the elderly man from the park, leaning on his cane. Their eyes met briefly as the FBI director walked to his front door. Inside, his family waited. His son looked up from his homework. "Dad, someone at school said you might get fired." The FBI director removed his tie, suddenly weary. "That's a possibility." "Because you told the truth?" "Because sometimes the truth makes powerful people uncomfortable." His son frowned. "That doesn't seem fair." "It isn't," the FBI director agreed, sitting down beside him. "But standing up for what's right isn't about being rewarded. It's about being able to look in the mirror each morning and respect the person looking back at you." Later, after everyone had gone to bed, the FBI director sat alone in his study. On his desk lay 2 documents, a letter of resignation he'd drafted just in case, and a comprehensive plan for police reform that he would present to the Attorney General tomorrow. He wasn't sure which one he would need, but he was prepared. Either way, his career might be ending, but something else was beginning. Something that felt for the first time in many years like genuine purpose. The FBI director adjusted his tie as he waited outside the Oval Office. 2 weeks had passed since the traffic stop, and the country still couldn't stop talking about it. Police reform bills were being introduced in Congress. Protests, both supporting him and condemning him, had sprung up nationwide. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The Traffic Stop That Changed America" and "When Power Meets Prejudice." The president's secretary nodded, and he entered the Oval Office. The president stood by the window looking out at the rose garden. "Please sit down," the president said without turning around. The FBI director took a seat, placing his leather portfolio on his lap. Inside was his letter of resignation, crisp white paper with black ink waiting to be offered if necessary. The president finally turned and sat behind the massive desk. "I've been getting calls from police unions across the country," he began. "They feel betrayed by you. They say morale is at an all-time low. With respect, sir, perhaps they should be more concerned about why so many communities fear their officers." The president's expression tightened. "I've also received calls from civil rights leaders who see you as a champion, congressional leaders who want to pass reform legislation with your endorsement, governors asking for your help reviewing their state policing standards." The FBI director waited. These weren't just observations. They were the setup for whatever came next. The president leaned forward. "You've become a symbol. That makes you valuable to some people and dangerous to others. The question is, what do we do with that?" "Sir, I didn't ask to become a symbol. I simply reported what happened to me. And in doing so, you've created a political crisis I now have to manage." The president tapped his fingers on the desk. "The Attorney General thinks you should step down. Says you've lost the trust of law enforcement. Says you've become too divisive to lead the Bureau effectively." The FBI director reached for his portfolio, ready to produce his resignation letter, but the president held up a hand. "I haven't asked for your resignation." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "The FBI director serves at the pleasure of the president," the FBI director said carefully. "If you believe my continued leadership damages the Bureau or its mission—" "I believe," the president interrupted, "that removing you now would send a dangerous message. That speaking truth to power gets you fired. That standing up against injustice costs you your career. He stood and walked to a portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the wall. But staying in your position won't be easy. You'll face resistance from within and without. The old guard will fight you every step of the way. The FBI director felt a weight lift from his shoulders. I'm prepared for that. Are you? Because this isn't just about keeping your job. It's about using your position to create real change. The president turned. I want you to lead a special task force on police reform, working with the Justice Department with state and local agencies. Not just writing reports that gather dust, but implementing actual changes. They spoke for nearly an hour, outlining a vision for what could be accomplished. When the FBI director finally left the White House, the sun was setting over Washington, casting long shadows across the National Mall. His driver opened the car door. Back to headquarters, sir? No, the FBI director said. Take me to the neighborhood, where I was pulled over. The suburban streets looked different in the fading light. The FBI director asked the driver to stop near where the incident had occurred. He got out and stood on the sidewalk, remembering the feel of the gun pointed at his head, the cold pavement under his knees. A woman walking her dog approached him, then stopped in recognition. You're him, aren't you? From the news? He nodded. I live just down the street, she said, pointing. I saw what happened that night. I was one of the people who recorded it. She hesitated. I wasn't sure whether to post it online. I worried about causing trouble. But then I thought, if this can happen to someone like you, then it can happen to anyone, he finished. Exactly. She shifted uncomfortably. Those officers, they've pulled over every person of color who drives through this neighborhood. My husband, my brother-in-law, my son's teacher. We filed complaints. Nothing happened until you. The FBI director looked around at the peaceful street, the beautiful homes. I'm sorry it took this long. Don't be sorry, she said firmly. Just fix it. Back at FBI headquarters, the deputy director was waiting with news. The officers who pulled you over have been fired. Official announcement came an hour ago. The FBI director nodded. It was justice, but it felt hollow. 2 officers removed didn't change the underlying problems. There's something else, the deputy HOA director continued. Applications to the FBI are up 60% since your congressional testimony, especially among minority candidates. That night, he called together his senior leadership team. They gathered in the conference room, uncertainty on their faces. Many had been avoiding him these past 2 weeks, unsure where things stood politically. The president has asked me to lead a task force on police reform, he announced. I've accepted. But I can't do it alone, and I can't do it while neglecting my duties here. He outlined his plan, how the Bureau would need to change from within, even as it helped other agencies reform. How they would review training protocols, hiring practices, disciplinary procedures. How they would need to rebuild trust with communities that had long feared law enforcement. This won't be easy, he concluded. Some of you might not agree with this direction. If that's the case, I'll accept your resignation without judgment. But if you stay, I expect your full commitment. One by one, they nodded. Even those who had been skeptical could see that this was a historic opportunity, a chance to be on the right side of change. 6 months later, the FBI director stood in the rain at a memorial service for a young officer killed in the line of duty. The officer, a recent graduate of the new training program the task force had implemented, had been known in his community for his outreach work with troubled youth. After the service, the officer's mother gripped the FBI director's hand. My son joined the force because of you, she said through tears, because of what happened to you and what you did about it. He wanted to be part of the change. That evening he sat with his family around the dinner table. His son, now considering colleges, looked up from his plate. Dad, I've been thinking about maybe going into law enforcement. The FBI director raised an eyebrow. Because of what happened. To me? Partly. But mostly because of what you did afterward. You showed that one person can make a difference if they're willing to stand up. Later, the FBI director stood at his home office window, watching the last light fade from the sky. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Another city had adopted the policing reforms his task force had recommended. Progress was slow, but it was happening. Not just because he'd been pulled over that night, but because he'd refused to let that moment define him without his consent. He thought about all the people who'd never had his platform, his voice, his power to demand change, the ones who'd suffered in silence or shouted without being heard. He couldn't undo what had happened to them, but he could make sure their experiences weren't in vain. On his desk sat a framed photo from his swearing in as FBI director, alongside a newspaper clipping about the traffic stop. Between them lay a handwritten note from a cadet at the academy. "Thank you for showing us that the badge is meant to protect everyone, including those who wear it." The FBI director smiled. His career wasn't over as many had predicted. It had simply found its true purpose. Sometimes, he reflected, it takes a moment of powerlessness to understand how power should really be used. His phone rang. A police chief from a major city seeking advice on implementing reforms. The work continued. The conversation continued. And because of one traffic stop on one ordinary night, the country was finally listening.